Dan, you seem to be picking something up from your vantage point at Westminster, that Corbynism without Corbyn may now be on the minds. You know, most normal young men, their thoughts turn to fancy in the spring, but it would appear from what you say that in the parliamentary scuttlebutt, you're picking up people's thoughts turning to something else, turning to a post-Corbyn future. Could you expand on that for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, it's that, obviously, it may have not sort of missed your attention, George, that I'm not the biggest Jeremy Corbyn fan, to put it mildly. But what I have...
But you wouldn't be blinded by that, Dan.
No, of course not, George. Of course not. But what I have noticed, and I have picked up, is even amongst those people who support 100% support Jeremy Corbyn's political agenda, support his political direction, support, if you like, his, dare I say, use the word, his political project. There is a growing frustration even amongst those. Frustration is not the right word. Growing exhaustion, if you like, amongst those who support the project, and indeed up to this point have supported him, about the way that he keeps getting sidetracked into these sort of what they see as these sort of these completely extraneous and meaningless debates about issues such as obviously the scandal we've talked about before, as I see it, the scandal within the Labour Party of anti-Semitism, his defence of Putin, his sort of defence, his constant arguments that Russia wasn't in some way involved in the Skripal poisoning, attempts to question that the Syrians were in some way involved in the chemical weapons attacks in Syria, and that Assad was responsible for that. And these issues that are just not part of, or should, in their view, should not be part of Labour's core message about the economy, social reform, economic reform, reform of public services. And the question for the first time for them is, has Jeremy Corbyn taken the Corbynism project as far as it can go? And is there any way of potentially handing over the baton to somebody who could move forward with the same agenda, but without the same level of political baggage?
So a bit of a Wenger moment.
Well, yes, but I mean, I think to be fair to Wenger, I mean, he obviously did actually win a couple of titles, and Jeremy has yet to do that. But yeah, I mean, basically, Jeremy's not getting any younger. To the extent that you take any interest, anyone takes any interest in the opinion polls now. I mean, the most recent opinion poll had the Conservatives opening up for the first time their biggest lead since the election. And like I said, there's a question of whether amongst Jeremy Corbyn supporters, whether Jeremy Corbyn is the guy to take the Labour Party into power.
Well, I'll come back to that, but isn't there a bit of our old friend, the straw man here, Dan? Because Corbyn never defended Putin and never said the Syrians weren't involved in chemical weapons attacks. What he said was, we should perhaps gather some evidence. And there's some evidence, I think, that chimes with the electorate, not least because, at least on the Duma thing at the moment, the wheels could be beginning to come off the official narrative on that.
Well, I mean, I think someone's constructing a straw man here, George, but I don't think it's necessarily me. I mean, the reality is that Jeremy Corbyn has attempted consistently to raise doubts about the circumstances around the Skripal poisoning. I mean, and we've discussed this before, but I don't think there's anybody now who seriously questions who was responsible for that. I mean, similarly...
There is, you need to get out of your bubble, Dan, if you think that.
Well, I mean, I said seriously, George. I mean, there are some people.
There are
who
very large
obviously...
numbers of people. I can tell you that anecdotally, not in terms of any opinion poll evidence. Maybe you have some, but anecdotally, there is widespread, not least in Salisbury, scepticism about the government's
George,
ever-changing narrative.
I mean, you have your anecdotes and I have mine. We can swap anecdotes, but I mean, I think the proof of the pudding will be in eating on this. But I mean, I think the reality is Jeremy Corbyn, from the beginning, attempted to cast doubts on the government's official version of the skillful poisoning, and I think as we move forward, I think the evidence will prove that the government was right and Jeremy Corbyn was wrong on that.
Well, we'll see. Let me turn then, Dan, because the most interesting part of your very interesting column for me was the names that you named as people who are beginning to, you didn't put it this way, but go on manoeuvres, preparing for this Wenger moment when Wenger unexpectedly cut short a year before the end of his contract, his tenure. And one of those you mentioned was John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor. Now, I've known both of them for 40 years nearly, and I can think of no two men that are closer personally and politically. What makes you think, as you seem to, that McDonnell would be up for taking Jeremy's gig?
Well, as I said, I mean, I'm not sure I actually said that John McDonnell had himself said that he wanted to take Jeremy's gig. But what I did say, and this is, simply a matter of fact, that over the last couple of months, what we have seen, and you've said it yourself, George. I mean, these are two people who, up until now, have been like, peas in the same sort of left-wing political pod. I mean, there's been complete unanimity between the stances that John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn have taken. But over the last few weeks, it's been very noticeable on a number of issues. I mean, we were talking about, Russia's responsibility for the skillful poisoning. John McDonnell has, unlike you and Jeremy, has openly said that he believes Russia was responsible for the skillful poisoning. I mean, I sat in the House of Commons only last week when John McDonnell, chastised the Tories for not introducing more stringent sanctions on the Assad regime for their perceived responsibility in the chemical weapons attacks. I mean, again, you've yourself shown how you and Jeremy have a different point of view on that. On a range of issues now, John McDonnell, as I said in my piece, is constructing it, as it were, a sort of a cordon sanitaire around Jeremy Corbyn, and is constructing his own, adopting his own positions on this. And as you beautifully framed in your question, this is very unusual because up until now, John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn have been in lockstep, and now we're starting to see John McDonnell specifically coming out and adopting significantly different stances to Jeremy Corbyn on a range of issues.
Now, you indicated a couple at least of other potential runners and riders in any post-Corbyn, let's call it post-Wenger moment. One was Rebecca Long Bailey, who was a good phrase you used, road-tested and thought yet not ready, and Angela Rayner, who you said has fallen out of favour. Tell us about those two, please.
Well, I mean, I think we need to just sort of just be slightly accurate about what I wrote. I mean, I did actually write. I mean, the key thing I wrote was that although people around Jeremy are starting to sort of think the unthinkable. It's one thing to think the unthinkable and act on the unthinkable. And I think one of the problems that those who are starting to see issues with Jeremy's leadership from that side of the party have is, as I said, they've got the same problem that the moderates have in they're struggling to find a candidate who could take, as it were, take the mantle on from Jeremy Corbyn. Rebecca Long Bailey is somebody who they definitely identified as somebody who they were grooming as a potential succession for reasons I've got to be honest, I can't quite understand. They sort of put her up for a number of major sort of media opportunities, formed the opinion that she hadn't done very well. I've got to be honest, I don't necessarily share that view. I mean, I actually think Rebecca Long-Bailey's actually a more polished sort of performer than she's given credit for. Angela Rayner is someone who, again, they initially regarded, if you like, as one of their own, but has subsequently broken from Jeremy Corbyn. Friends of Angela Rayner, make very clear now that she doesn't see herself as someone who is one of his core allies, and is somebody who is quite successfully adopting, developing her own profile. Is somebody who's quite well respected now across the political spectrum, and is somebody who I think, potentially is now a potential future Labour leader. But she would not be a Labour leader who would be seen as carrying, if you like, the Corbynite flame in the way that the Corbyn and his core supporters would feel comfortable with.
Any new leader would have to be on the left, wouldn't there? I mean, the shoe that didn't drop in all that you've said and written is that the likes of the last generation of potential leaders, Cooper and Umuna and people like that, they're just not at these races, are they?
No, you're absolutely right. They're not. They're not at all. I mean, they're not in the frame. I mean, there's absolutely zero prospect of somebody like Yvette Cooper or Chuka Umunna taking over. And as I said in my piece, any question of even the remotest question of Jeremy Corbyn either being deposed or stepping down as Labour leader is predicated on the fact that if he did so, it would have to be in a scenario where he is replaced by somebody that the left is comfortable with, and somebody who is perceived to be someone who could take the Corbynite agenda forward, which is why I actually use the phrase in the piece, people are talking about the idea of Corbynism without Corbyn. And it's similar to the sort of the problems, obviously, again, that New Labour had, which was you had a political philosophy and a political strategy that was built around an individual, built around Tony Blair, and nobody could construct a way of successfully passing the mantle on. And I think that's the thing that a number of Jeremy Corbyn's supporters are struggling with now. They see his weaknesses, they see he's carrying this political baggage, they see the issues that he's got in terms of moving his agenda forward, but they can't at the moment identify somebody else who would be in a position to replace him.
And yet, subsequent to your piece, I did see some polling evidence. I can't vouch for it. I don't know where it came from. I saw it on Twitter in response to you. There was a recent poll, apparently, of Labour Party members in which the percentage of people thinking that Corbyn's doing a good job had risen to a pretty staggering 80%. Did you see that polling?
Yeah, I didn't, but I mean, I don't dispute it. I mean, I'm sure that amongst what I would like to call the Corbyn cultists within the sort of Labour membership, I'm sure their devotion to
that would be 80% of the membership of 600,000 people.
No, absolutely, and I'm quite happy to.
That's a big cult, Dan.
No, it's a very significant cult. What is interesting though is equally we've had polling. We equally had polling last week, which showed amongst the British people, which is a much bigger sample than obviously the electorate as a whole. Theresa May's margin over Jeremy Corbyn in terms of who the British people, as opposed to the Corbyn cultists, regard as the best prime minister is increasing now. Obviously you, George, articulate on a daily basis all the problems that the government is having. Theresa May has, but amongst the voters, Theresa May's popularity is actually increasing, and that's the point. I mean, I wasn't talking about as I say that the sort of slightly sort of brainwashed cultists who currently are members of the Labour Party, but amongst Jeremy Corbyn's parliamentary supporters, there is a perception now that they are aware, if you like, of this gap that is developing between what the Labour Party members and Jeremy Corbyn's core activists sort of believe and what the electorate as a whole.
Well, yeah, I mean, for reasons of electoral law, we can't go into the opinion poll that's upcoming in just a couple of weeks, actually. Perhaps we should talk again after that and see if your prediction has come true.